Welcome to Needle in a Haystack. We're going to be talking about searching in iOS, specifically the search that was added system-wide in iOS 9. Just as a little preview, we're there's a reverb echo down here. It's been annoying. Okay, there's not going to be no code along here, no live coding. I don't tend to gods that way. All the slides will be available immediately after. This is using Swift 2.3, Xcode 7.3.1. So those questions you never get them to get asked. Okay, so when we think about search, search is a very broad term. There's a lot of different modes of search you can think about. Usually what people think about search is, I want to find something I didn't know that I wanted, right? This is sort of your discovery search. I'm hungry, I want to eat. Or I'm hungry and I want pizza. But it's not like I want to know how to get to the specific pizza place. And that type of search is kind of called discovery, right? And you see this a lot in Apple talking about the App Store, because you've gone to all this effort to make an app, and no one knows that you did it, right? So we're going to touch on that briefly today, but really what I'd like to talk about is a different mode of search I call rediscovery. So this is finding your app again, right? Someone's gone and done something in your app, and they want to get back to that place. To get back to the food example, it's kind of like, I know I want to go to this pizza place. Where is it? How do I get there? Right? So you have some sort of idea where you're going, and you want to get back there. And this is where iOS search can really help. So search on iOS 9 is based off 3 different technologies, so we're going to go over that. And then we'll go over some just general advice if you decide to take on this sort of task. Okay, so first type of search is index-based searching. Has anyone here heard of index-based searching before? Okay. This is a very traditional way of searching. If you've had any extensive computer science education, you may have come across this. And the basic idea there is you have a highly optimized structure called the index that you can search and get results off very fast. And when you want to add stuff to this index, the index does this ingestion process, where it takes this new information and places it in this highly optimized format. The first web search engines were based off this. So the index would be what you were searching when you typed in the web. And when it wanted to gather new information, it would send a crawler out to the internet to go to different sites, take that information, ingest it along with some metadata like where it was, when it got that information, so it could be easily searched later. So on the Mac, we're very familiar with this with Spotlight. In fact, all of Apple, they call it kind of Spotlight. So it's been on the Mac for a long time, and when you're on your Mac and you add a new file to the file system, you expect that you'll be able to search for that file right away and the contents of the file. And that's because when you add something to the file system, the system automatically detects it and runs through this ingestion process. Now it can't recognize every file, but it knows a lot of them. So if it's like a PDF, it'll get the contents in there, and you can search the PDF within Spotlight Search. And you can also get some metadata about the authors or when you added it to the file system. And it's kind of confusing because if you look at Apple material, Spotlight refers to both the user-facing feature and sort of the behind-the-scenes technology. Now, iOS has Spotlight Search as well. However, on iOS, when you add a new app to the system, it really adds some metadata to the Spotlight Search. It adds like the app name, the icon, maybe the author, but it doesn't search inside the app. It doesn't have a way of doing that. And that's now left up to the developer in iOS 9, so you can hook into that. So just so everyone's on the same page with what we're talking about, this is the search in iOS 9. You pull down from the top, or swipe all the way to the left, and you enter a search term. You're going to get several results, usually some suggestions for apps, some websites. If you type in a special term like weather, you might get results in line right there. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, to sort of drive this talk, I cobbled together a little demonstration app. And this one's called Board Game Addict. It's for people who are really into the niche hobby of board games, like Settlers of Catan and whatnot, right? And so let's just look at this app in action, because we'll kind of over it. You click on the icon, you got 2 main sections. One telling you about popular games in the industry right now, and other with the news about what's going on. Now you see this list of games right here. This is what we're going to start out by indexing. Okay, so we have all those things that the user has not actually encountered yet. If you click on one of those entries, of course, you get down to a detail page, and it's a fairly simple app. You've seen these type of apps several times. You're sort of a drill down type paradigm. All right, so let's add index-based searching to this app, and in fact, let's start with this guy right here. This game is called Brass. It is a classic Martin Wallace hero game that recreates the Industrial Revolution. And you'll notice that it has this picture of a man holding what looks like kind of a toy or something. I've never even played it, but it makes for a good image. Okay, so we go in iOS search right away, and we search for Brass. We're not going to see anything related to this app, right? And you see what we get. We get Wikipedia entry for the metal alloy brass and some suggested website, and that all makes sense. But nothing for us, so let's fix that. So the first thing you want to do, after you get all the appropriate libraries in there from CoreSpotlight, is you're going to make this object called an attribute set. Now an attribute set is basically a huge properties object. It has literally hundreds of properties, and you'll never use all of them. You don't have to set all of them. In fact, you should only set the ones that are relevant to you. So to make this attribute set, this searchable item attribute set, you have to give it a type. Here we're using type data because that's one of the most generic types you can give it. If the data in your app can be described more specifically, you should try to consider one of the subtypes, some of which are like PDFs, contacts, messages. So now we have this properties object. We do what properties objects do, and we set properties on it, right? You need to set at least one, so let's go with the title here. The title here, give it Brass. Okay. So we get in a title. What we do with this attribute set? Well, we want to make a searchable item out of it. So the searchable item takes this attribute set and takes two other parameters, a unique identifier and a domain identifier. These are both strings, and these are both totally optional. You can make these nil if you want them to be. So for the unique identifier, if you give it nil, it's just going to generate a unique identifier for you. We're specifying one there in case later we want to go back and reference this item again. We need a unique ID, obviously. The domain identifier we're not going to touch on too much in this talk, but that's mainly for grouping a lot of relevant items together. So for instance, later if you wanted to batch delete a whole bunch of games, you might use this domain identifier here. And we're using the reverse DNS entry notation to avoid collisions with other things in the system. Okay, so we have our item. Now we can index it. So I'm going to see a searchable index. We get the default searchable index and tell it to index this array of items. Now in real practice, you'd get an array of more than one, but for demonstration purposes, we're going to hand it that one item. The first time this code is called, it'll add the item to the index. Subsequent calls of the same code will just update that item. So if we were just to change the title here and call this a second time, it would update the title on the index. So now let's do another search for Brass. We go in there and we get results. So that's good. Well, it's a start, right? That is our app. That is our icon. But that's our app icon, right? This is really not giving any more context to the user about what they were searching for brass. They certainly were searching for a brass sheep, right? So let's try to improve that. One way might be, instead of showing that icon, let's show them the image of the game from our app. So the way we're going to do that is take that attribute set and add more properties to it. Here we're setting the thumbnail data property. And that takes the actual JPEG data from a UI image. And we're setting that on there. So when we search again, we get the image of the game. You see the man holding a little toy again. And that's a lot better. That's very mnemonic to our app. But we can do more than that. There's also a content description on the attribute set. So this adds a lot more text, talking about the classic Martin Wallace hero game, blah, blah, blah. So we search again, and we see that description under the title of Brass. And now we're starting to look a lot like the other search results there. And we're becoming more relevant. However, now that we've added more information to the attribute set, we can try searching on that information as well. So let's just take a little small step to that and search for Martin Wallace. So, good news is we're still on the results page, right? We're a lower ranking because they're taking stuff out of our description and not our title, but we're kind of okay with that. Like if your user searches for Martin Wallace, it makes much more sense that the Wikipedia entry for Martin Wallace is above our app. So title gets better ranking priority, but content description can still help. Okay, so now we're showing up in the search results. What happens when our user touches our results? What should we do then? Well, our app delegate is going to get called. And the specific function in the app delegate is going to be continue user activity. Now, continue user activity is called by several different ways. So we're going to have to do some specific logic to see if it's calling it because of this circumstance. Now we're going to be passed a user activity object, NS user activity object. And that object is kind of interesting. The idea of the NS user activity object is to encapsulate what the user is doing or intending to do. In this particular instance, thank you. In this particular instance, it's going to be that they touched on an item in Spotlight Search. So we're going to take that user activity and look at the activity type. In this particular instance, touching Spotlight Search, the activity type is always going to be com.apple.CoreSpotlight item. Now that when we know that's activity, we can start looking at the user activity's user info. The user info is in this dictionary, and it's basically a context object, which means it could have hundreds of entries in it or 0 entries in it, depending on how it's being called and passed around. In the code I've shown you here, there will be precisely one entry in that dictionary. And that's under this key of KS searchable item activity identifier. And that's provided to us from the system. We didn't do anything programmatically for that. Under that key is going to be the game title. In this instance is going to be brass. So now we've determined that this is something we respond to. What should our app do? How should we respond? Well, you kind of think about that. What does the user expect? The user would expect to be right back to that game detail page, as if they had just left the app from there. Now that may or may not have anything to do with the state of your app at the moment. Your app could be in a new section. It could be on the main page. Your app may not even be in memory anymore. This may trigger a cold start of your app. So we would implement something like a navigate to game detail function. And that function is going to be different for every app. But you need to watch out, because you can't assume anything about the state of your app at that point. You may have to instantiate all the view controllers you need to get to that point. For this type of app, you would instantiate view controllers, and since we're a nav controller-based app, you would use set view controllers on the app to get you the nice little crumb trail, getting you that down to that detail, and then present that to the user. So that's a quick look at index-based searching. Well, now we're going on to something different. Now we're going to usage-based searching. So all those games that we wanted to index previously index-based searching, we can do that the first time anyone starts our app. They don't even have to go in the game section. But usage searching is specifically based off what the user has seen or done in your app. For example, if they've made a document, you might use this. If they've edited a picture, you might use this. Even if they just visited certain points in your app, you might want to use this. And that last point there, the navigation points, those can be used by almost any app. So we're going to focus on that first. All right. So back to our little demo app. We haven't gone into the news section yet. So let's say the user taps on that, and this is what they see. And that is pretty bad. There's no way we chip something like that. That's a horrible app, even horrible looking. However, I've left that blank and memorable for a reason. And that's to show you precisely in the code that follows, we're not even talking about the contents of this section. We're talking specifically about that navigation point you see there called board game news, right? All right. So the user searches for board game news. They're not going to find anything because we haven't done anything to add it to searching. The first thing we're going to do is make an NS user activity object. Now, before I told you about NS user activity is representing what the user is intending to do or is doing at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a user activity object to encapsulate the user's intent and tell the system that's what the user is doing. In this case, looking at board game news. So you make a user activity with just an activity type, which is string, which could be any string, but you don't want to collide in the system, so we use reverse DNS notation again. And you set some properties on it. Here, obviously, we set a title. Then to show that this activity is for searching, we set the eligible for search true. Who here has any experience with NS user activity? Okay. So NS user activity is also used in like Handoff and some other concerns in the system, right? And it was for Handoff first, and then this activity stuff, this search stuff was kind of added later. So that's why some of these properties seem a little haphazard. Anyway, so we make it eligible for searching, and now we can add keywords. And the keywords are an interesting opportunity because they give you an opportunity to provide synonyms and closely associated terms with your app. So when we talk about this particular app with Board Game News, we don't mean like Yahtzee or Candyland. We mean like Settlers of Catan or Risk or maybe those bigger type long games. So we added the keywords Eurogames and Ameritrash. Sorry about that. We also added the word Essen. So since this is about board game news, there's a big board game convention in Essen, Germany every year where a huge majority of the news comes out of, right? Now for our American-centric audience, for board game news, that's a closely related term. When you say Essen to someone in this hobby, they're going to think about news in Essen, Germany, and the board game spiel there. Now, where this was for a German-facing audience, you would not put this term in there, right? Essen probably has a lot more associations with it. But the point is, it's very specific to your app and a way to direct your users to your content where it's appropriate. Okay, so we have this user activity. Now we fully configured it. We need to do something with it. And my suggestion is set it on the user activity property on your view controller. Now, strictly speaking, what you need to do is keep a strong reference to it and call lifecycle methods on it like become current. And we'll get to become current in just a minute. However, if you set on your view controller, these sort of activity methods will be called automatically. Now, you may not have known that there was a user activity method on view controller. I mean, yeah, it's a big class, but maybe that one would have stuck out to you. And that's because it inherited from UI responder. So you may be thinking, well, a lot of things inherit from UI responder, right? You have views, for instance, buttons, all that good stuff. So why would you not just set it there? Well, you can, but only by setting on a view controller do you get automatically included in these lifecycle methods. So when it calls when view will appear, view did appear calls, it'll call become current on this, and it'll also keep the strong thing. So logically, it makes sense, and then you get a little extra benefit for setting the property on the view controller itself. All right. So now we search for board game news, and we get results. In the back, you can't see. We're down there at the bottom, and we have our app icon and the section board game news on it. Now, if we search on our keywords there, like Euro games, you'll see we're also including the results, although a little bit lower on the rankings. Okay, now I'm going to take a quick aside to talk about become current. So become current lets the system know that of all the NS user activities in the system, that this is the activity the user is currently doing, right? So there may be other NS user activities in the system, but when you call become current, you get become the king. You're the one that's happening on. And this has several effects. One, it gives you a vote for your results on the ranking systems. So the user is constantly going to this one section over another. This section will be much more relevant in the search rankings, and Apple's kind of recording that. Second of all, it helps it participate in other concerns, like Handoff and Siri Reminders. Does anyone know about Siri Reminders? Okay. So Siri Reminders are sort of when you're looking at something in an app, you can say, hey Siri, remind me of this, and it'll put an entry in the Reminders app for you, giving some information about what you were doing. The information it gleans, a lot of it is from the NS user activity here. So this helps in participation with that. Okay, so back to our search. We're back to board game news, and we can do better with that app icon, of course, and maybe a description. So before, when we needed to improve that, we took an attribute set some properties on it. And now we're going to take an attribute set and set some properties on it. So for this time, when we're done with the attribute set, we're going to set down the NS user activity instead of a CoreSpotlight searchable item. So that's the basic flow there. Now, the actual configuration of this attribute set looks a lot like before, where we set the content description. And the content description here, you do not want, or anywhere really, you do not want to just mirror the title. You get extra points for having something different there than just the same things in your title. And then you're going to set the thumbnail data. And here we're doing it from the icon that was associated with our news on that front page. And then when we search again, we'll see the icon with the description. So that was a navigation point. But what about something like this? So when you're down the detail for this game, you're at a navigation point. But we also know from what we did prior that this game was indexed as well. So if I search for brass, will I see duplication? Well, the answer is if we've done everything so far, yes, you would. So obviously you don't like that. How would you prevent this duplication? Well, the answer is, you saw we reused attribute sets before for two different concerns. We're going to use the same attribute sets for both concerns, and we'll make sure we sync our IDs across all those concerns. So let's just show what that looks like in code. So the same attribute set we saw before, we had set this content description and this image. We're going to set a property on there called related unique identifier. Here we're going to get the same ID as before, which is unique ID for brass. Then when we use that attribute set to make a searchable item, we're going to use that same unique identifier and same attribute set. And when we configure our user activity, we're going to set a content attribute set there to use the same one, which is what we just did previously. So now that we've done those things are both logically tied together, and in the system they're tied together. Their life cycles are tied together. So if I delete one, it can delete the other. Now there's been improvements in iOS 10 if you don't want to do it this way, and I'll leave that for exercise for the reader. But it's kind of important that these are tied together, and it also improves the ranking, right? So this has now become a much more relevant result as far as search is concerned. Now, before I mentioned that unique identifier was optional if you didn't want to manage IDs. And here, we're clearly in the realm of managing IDs. We got to figure out what is a good ID, we have to keep track of the system for it, all those things. So what makes a good ID? Well, the honest answer depends on your data and your system. So there are many candidates for a good ID. However, if you can swing it, there is a candidate for the best unique ID. And that is a universal URL. So what is a universal URL? So universal URL is a regular URL, like regular, I mean the scheme is HTTP, HTTPS, that can link directly into your app. So here's an example. Someone sends me a listing an entry on Etsy about this mug they think I might like. And I usually expect when I touch this, it'll open up mobile Safari and take me to that listing in Etsy. But if this is a universal URL, which it is, and I have the Etsy app installed, which I do, instead it's going to take me directly to that product page in Etsy. And this is pretty powerful. From the user standpoint, this is like any other URL. Now, prior to iOS 9, you could accomplish something kind of similar with custom URL schemes, which was instead of using HTTP as your scheme, you would just make one up. So it could be game : / or Facebook : / but that had a lot of problems. Not the least of which was collision. Like if you made an app and I made the app with the same custom URL scheme, there was no resolution for who would win, right? And you could just take over each other's. Now, obviously, this only works if you have some sort of logical mirroring of content in your app to a website. So this will not apply to all people. However, if you do that, it's very, very powerful. And you can start using these URLs for like sharing and to spread them about, and people get to your content regardless, whether it's on the app or the website, but pointing to the app where it can. So for our example app, it might look something like this. Someone sends you a link to a Martin Wallace game, and guess what? If you don't have the app installed, it takes you in mobile Safari to a website that looks remarkably similar to our app. And that's because the website doesn't really exist. But if we had the app installed, it would take you within our app. Okay. So steps to implement a universal URL. Now you may be surprised, not really. That's really a bunch of little pieces working in concert together. So there's going to be a lot of little mini steps here. So just bear with me. But because it takes a lot of moving pieces, this is a good way for a small app to have an advantage over bigger apps. I did a little quick survey, and the popular apps I thought would implement universal URLs in the app stores, right? And I was looking at Amazon, Etsy, eBay, whatsoever, and I'd say about 10% of them actually use universal URLs. Whereas when I started looking at smaller companies, the rate of adoption was much higher. Okay, so the first step is build your own website. That's outside the scope of this talk for obvious reasons. Good luck with that. Second step is preparing your website. So the first thing you want to do is in your root directory of your website, or in the well-known directory, you need to add a JSON file. And this JSON file is called Apple App Site Association. And yes, it has to be named that exactly without the extension. If you use Handoff or web credentials, you have to already have a file like this. But for universal URLs, you'll have an app links entry, and with that entry, you'll have a details entry, and the details have an app ID and paths. The app ID is your universally unique app ID given to you by Apple. It's your team name plus your reverse data, and that's the same thing you see when you go into iTunes Connect. The paths are paths on your website relative to root that can be opened up in your app with a corresponding URL scheme. So the Apple crawler, when it sees this, is going to go to bgaddict.com/games and everything under /games because of the star. And it's going to associate all those sub-URLs with your app. Same thing for news. Now, it's possible to have multiple apps associated with your website, but let's start out easy. So once you have that in place, also, for people who have done this before, this no longer has to be encrypted if you're not using web credentials. That was a major stumble for adoption earlier, and it was kind of a big pain. Okay. So on these paths where the Apple crawler, you told it to go look, for instance, /game here, you need to start marking up your content. The first place you want to start was the meta tag. That's the same as the app banner that you probably already have installed that says when they go on mobile Safari, here's my app, you should install it, right? This is pretty much the same tag, except for now the app argument is your universal URL. And that also strings the tie between your app and your website's app. Then you want to do sort of regular type stuff there. You have your regular content. Here the title will be brass. But on some of the other content, you want to mark it up using Open Graph or some entries from schema.org. Now, Open Graph is a Facebook protocol for semantically describing things on the web. So here we're using the Open Graph description of this is a classic Martin Wallace game. So I'll give links to the Open Graph website later. This is kind of the trickiest part to give advice on because it's so dependent on what you have on your website. But yes, Apple fully supports Open Graph and some of schema.org. You can even have stuff using the item properties in HTML5 that Apple is looking for, like review count and ratings value. And then, so in some of the search results you've seen on iOS on iOS on your phone, they might have ratings or reviews. It's pulling that from the web. Okay, so you got all that together. Now you need to test your website. So you just fire up the iOS simulator, right? Yeah. Doesn't help you at all. Luckily, we have this tool. the App Search API validation tool. And this is given to us by the search team at Apple. And you enter your URL, and it'll go through and tell you how you're doing. And this is useful not even just for universal URLs, but also for like your banner for installing your app and whatnot. So you get your base URL, it'll give you a grade with green, red, orange to tell you if you're doing great, bad, or could do better. And there's more entries than I've actually shown here. And that is found at this address, which will also be at the end of the talk. Now the interesting thing about this is once you go and enter in your URL there, it'll add it to the Applebot indexing for time on end. So this is a way to get your site actually indexed. I also suggest not just doing your base URL, but also check little sub-URLs off your path. So I would want to check 102/game/123 or whatever. And so that's it for your website. Now you need to work on your app. The first thing you want to do for your app is configure an Xcode. You want to configure the associated domains. Now this can be as simple as clicking on and clicking plus and say app links with your base URL on it. And Xcode will automatically configure everything for you. But if for some reason you have trouble with Xcode automatically configuring things for you, not that would ever happen, you can go look for the entitlements file it's supposed to add to your bundle, and also it configures your app ID on the portal as well. If you've done Handoff or web credentials, you'll see domains for that here as well. These are all closely related technologies. Okay. So once you've done that, then when you're indexing stuff and adding user activities for your stuff, you want your universal URL to be the unique identifier that's you're syncing across. So before we synced across all different IDs, here we want the ID to be a universal URL like before. So we've seen this code before, except for now we're just using universal URL. Now once we do that, there's a couple more things we need to do. So one of the things we need to do is we need to set the web page URL on the activity. And the next thing we need to do is make eligible for public indexing equal to true. So what eligible for public indexing does is, let me take a step back. So when you click on a search result, Apple is on device recording that as a vote for that search result for that term. And so it can give you better search results in the future. It kind of learns and knows what you like. That's all private and kept on device. Once you say eligible for public indexing equals true, when you click on that search result, eventually that search result vote gets uploaded to the Apple Cloud. As in, this term and this result are good pairs. And enough people report that result as good in aggregate, it will start being used as suggestion for users who don't have that content on their device as a good search result. So let's walk through a concrete example. Let's say we take this amazing app here, and every iOS user in the world, except for one, install it. And then they all search for brass, and then they all click the result for our app and brass. That would be a huge vote for it. So when the person who does not have it installed then searches for brass, they will get a suggestion to install our app. And that is one of the biggest hooks for discovery Apple's given us so far. Certainly they could do better, but that's at least one. Now there's some nuances to this process. I'm not going to go into details. They actually don't upload the stuff to index until it reaches a certain threshold, and they do things to prevent people from getting into the system. But they're kind of coy on what those actual details are, which just makes sense. So that's what you get from adding eligible for public indexing equal to true. Now let's say someone has touched your result, touched a universal URL in your system. Your app delegate is going to be called with continue user activity again. But this time it's from being touched as a universal URL. So your activity type is going to be user activity type browsing web. And then off that user activity type, you're going to use that web page URL that you set before. And again, you're going to navigate to the page you think should be navigated to and set up your view controllers and such. Now I hope at this point this isn't you. Because that's a lot of information and a lot of steps and three kind of disjointed technologies kind of working in concert together. So if you go to choose to implement this stuff, let me give you a few points of advice. First off, when you're starting to implement this, delete your app often instead of just reinstalling it via Xcode. The reason for that is only by deleting your app will you get everything that you've put into the on-device index out. Upgrading in place doesn't do it, and you can start, as you're changing this a lot, you can get to some edge cases where things just kind of start to look weird, you get duplications. It'll save you a lot of sanity. You can get the same thing from wiping the simulator if you find that to be faster. But when you're coming to speed in that helps. All this stuff is available on iOS 9 and further, but it's not supported on all devices. So you need to check if CoreSpotlight is available on your device before you start using it. So there was a call that says call the indexing, ask for the default index. In Swift, that's not optional. You're going to get one, but if you try to index with it, you could crash. So iPad 2 was something we got caught in testing where it was just crashing all the time. It's just not supported. There is a call on the index to say is indexing available. Okay. Almost anyone can use user activity, so try to use that. I mean, almost any app can use that. And once you do that, you're halfway or further to using Handoff or maybe even web credentials. Then consider iOS 10. So whenever you decide to design your app, iOS 10 added a lot of interesting features. Actually, it added a lot of maturity to the APIs for indexing, especially for like what happens if your indexing gets interrupted and updating your index when your app's not even running, those sort of type things. But the big thing it added is right now in iOS 9, when you add stuff to the index, that CoreSpotlight index, the only way you can access it is getting out of your app and searching system-wide. In iOS 10, within your app, you can actually start searching across that index. So that may or may not replace any other search you have in there, for data search or whatever, but it's at least a different avenue. You know what you can put in there, and you can actually test against it a little bit better. Okay, so let's talk about improving the rankings of what you're submitting for search. If your data supports navigation or doing phone calls, do that. That boosts your rating significantly. It doesn't apply to a lot of people. It's merely setting certain properties on the attribute set. Keep your content current. So everything you submit to the index and on user activity has an expiration date implied in it. They don't tell you what the default is, but I think it's like 3 weeks. But some things you don't want to ever expire from search. Like if a user makes a document in your app, you want them to always be able to get back to that as long as your app's around. So you would set the expiration date into far future or eternity, until the user actually deletes that document themselves, in which case you want to remove it from the index. On the flip side, there may be some stuff you don't want around for 3 weeks. Maybe it's a limited time deal or whatever. So don't just blindly add stuff without thinking about how long it should be around. Don't spam the index. A good rule of thumb is hundreds is good, thousands are okay, but anything more than that, you need to reconsider what you're doing. There is a hard limit that people have found just by adding stuff to the index. But Apple says they detect that sort of spamming an index and it downvotes your results accordingly. Then lastly, get to your content fast. That is, when someone touches a search result or a university role, get to your relevant content fast because it is timed. Apple's measuring the time from that touch to when the relevant information is shown. So don't show interstitials, don't show login screens, don't show ads. Get there fast. Okay, so we went over these 3 search technologies and some best search practices. I'll have these resources available right after the talk. And there's my contact information. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Well, if you think of some, I'll be around. Contact me in Slack or here. And I'll be happy to try to answer them. Thanks a lot.